This is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft chocolate, craft beer, and other artisan drinks. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional drinks writer, an advanced cicerone, the author of Pairing Beer and Chocolate, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or on annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. Back in June, Melinda and I attended Crafted for Action's Craft Beverage Conference in Atlanta, Georgia, which was a fantastic few days of learning and making new friends and meeting online friends in real life for the first time. The conference brought together both novices and professionals across a range of beverage segments for talks, classes, and tastings, as well as just some really chill hangouts to get to know each other. Crafted for Action also awarded their Crafted Fellows grant for beverage entrepreneurs seeking to expand their business opportunities. 4 great candidates gave presentations, with Ofori Brothers Wine, helmed by Kumi Arhin, ultimately winning the $8,500 grant. Ofori Brothers hit the market less than a year ago with a Riesling made with Ghanaian ginger, an ingredient familiar to members of the Ghanaian diaspora in the U.S. This was interesting to me on its own, but as I was reading the informational material for the candidates, I was surprised to read that Kumi's family had a history of cacao production in Ghana, where most of his relatives still live. I reached out to Kumi after the conference, and we had a great conversation about how that legacy in cacao has impacted his current venture in wine, the significance of including a flavor ingredient from Ghana in an American wine and how that helps him reach a new audience, and the importance of storytelling along the way. Here's Kumi Arhin of Ofori Brothers Wine. Kumi, thank you so much for joining me today. I became aware of Ofori Brothers at the Crafted for Action conference that we were both at last month in Atlanta. You were taking part in the Crafted Fellows competition and you won that. Congratulations. That is awesome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I was looking through the informational posters for all of the entries in that competition, and I was reading through yours and was surprised to see that your family had a background in cocoa production in Ghana. So I would love to hear, before we talk about your wine, a little bit more about your family story, if you can share some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for having me on. This is great. So my family's originally from Ghana in West Africa, and I was born in the UK, but moved to the US as a kid. But 99% of my family is in Ghana, so I've always had strong ties to it. And one of my uncles is sort of like our family historian. And over the years, as I would get older and visited him, he would share some really interesting stories about his grandfather and his brothers, who are my great-grandfather and brothers. And they went by the name of the Ofori brothers. Ofori is my mother's maiden name. And so they were produce merchants in the early 1900s in Ghana. And Ghana, if you're not familiar, cocoa is Ghana's largest export, and it's one of their primary domestic products that they produce and export around the world, and it's responsible for a lot of the world's chocolate. And so in the early 1900s, my great-grandfather and his brothers got involved in the cocoa commerce and did quite well for themselves and scaled it. And I think probably the coolest little factoid is Cadbury chocolate, the UK company. I came across some academic information that showed that the Ofori brothers at one point were responsible for 30% of Cadbury's cocoa supply. So it was really cool and inspiring to see their story and the impact they had in helping Ghana become one of the leaders in cocoa production and agricultural export.
Yeah, that is really cool. Do you know how long that continued into the 20th century?
Yeah, so their business was around for a few decades, but ultimately it did die down, I think, in the 1950s in Ghana. And there were some stories around that. I think that a lot of things that impacted the political climate affected the business. But in a lot of ways, their story inspired me, not just because it was one about entrepreneurship and commerce, but something about philanthropy as well. They were very active in their community and community advocacy and education. Their father was also a reverend and built one of the churches in the Presbyterian Church where the area they're from. So there's a lot of community engagement that I think really inspired me about their story. And even though the business did ultimately fizzle out, I think honoring that legacy was a true honor. And so that's what inspired me to take the name and make something new with it.
Yeah, that's really cool. We'll talk a little bit more about how you've incorporated that storytelling into what you're doing with Ofori Brothers Wine. Tell me a little bit about your process and kind of the philosophy behind starting this wine company.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the Ofori Brothers brand is really rooted in these ideas of culture, legacy, and heritage, because it starts from a very significant family moment for me. And I really got inspired by the Ofori Brothers story, and I was tracing my family tree back 7, 8 generations. And I think being somebody who's, originally family is from West Africa, but I'm here in the West. There's a lot of like-minded, young West Africans who have that kind of diasporic connection,
Mm.
but sometimes they can feel disconnected from it. And so I thought a brand that helps you feel like you're having a taste of the motherland, a connection back home, is something that would really resonate with folks. And also knowing that the Ofori Brothers story is something that would inspire folks as well. And so that's what prompted the idea to have these unique infusions as the basis for the wine product. And so the very first product is a Riesling, but it's infused with ginger from Ghana. And so not only does that add this incredibly interesting and complex like flavor profile, but it's also something that when you think about it in terms of like that connection, you're tasting the motherland. It's like taste of tradition. And I think it's really resonated with people as a result.
That is really cool. Yeah, let's dive in and talk a little bit more about the wine specifically. So, the main one that I've seen is the Riesling with the ginger that you were just talking about.
Yes.
Let's talk about on the just the wine side itself. What made you select Riesling as the base grape for that, knowing that you were going to use this ginger, and how are you going about sourcing with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So uh, early on, as I was doing R&D, I was getting a lot of feedback for folks in my target market that Rieslings were kind of right in the sweet spot in terms of where a lot of folks' preference was for the whites, right? I noticed a lot of people did not particularly like whites that were too dry, but also didn't want whites that were too sweet. And Riesling seemed to be perfectly fine in the spot where it's obviously still a rather sweeter wine, but the particular Riesling that I work with is a little bit on the drier side. And so I thought it was like the perfect intersection right there for my target market. And truthfully, ginger is something I think culturally for us, it has this idea of like a nourishing property, right? Like when you get sick, we sometimes think that we have to drink ginger ale, even though it's not scientifically
Sure.
accurate. There is something that's very like culturally rooted in the idea that ginger has a healing property. And so even before I let folks taste it, I would just say the words Riesling with ginger, and I would see their faces light up.
Mm.
And as an entrepreneur, that was a very validating feeling and it made me want to explore it further. But naturally, the process of conducting that infusion, there's a few different strategies to go about it. And so I was pretty scientific in my approach of testing it. So I tried a few different formulation styles. So all the formulation is done post fermentation. Um, but even after post fermentation, there's different methods one could employ, whether that's using ground ginger, ginger extract, ginger flavor, and different intensities of the ginger level as well. And so I would have various different samples that I produced with my producer that I work with in Pennsylvania. The grapes are sourced from the Lake Erie region of northern Pennsylvania, which is just the perfect climate for Riesling grapes. And I would have friends come over, and there'd be different stations at my house where they would kind of be doing random blind testing. They'd be given a order of different ones to try, and they'd have to record their feedback on a tasting sheet on their phones. And I took a bit of my background in technology here and uh, analyzed all the data, ran it through AI, and got some really interesting insights from just doing those kinds of studies at my house. gave the feedback back to my producer. We talked about it, discussed it, iterated two or three more times with this process until we landed on the perfect formulation. And it's a bit of a science and an art, right? Like
Yeah.
you can't be completely like data driven with it. You have to have a little bit of opinion in as well. And so I think it was just the perfect balance of the two, and I'm really happy with the end result.
That's really cool. Talk a little bit more about the role of ginger in Ghana, and you talked a little bit about the diaspora having that connection to that. In my mind, I connect ginger to Asian cuisines. Talk about it a little bit in its role in Ghana.
Yeah, absolutely. There are various dishes in Ghana where ginger plays a role in our palate, and even insofar as in beverages, right? And I think sometimes in the West, that's a little bit more of a unique idea to think that ginger could play a role in so many different beverages, but we do see it in alcoholic beverages and cocktails. But as far as I've seen, there hasn't been a wine that has a Riesling that has infused ginger before, and so it was an ambitious exploration, but it was something once again that was rooted in a familiar product and ingredient that resonates with a lot of people across different West African cultures. And as I sourced the particular ginger, I really wanted to work with a local family-owned business that had been specializing in this for a long time to honor also the same kind of spirit
Mhm.
of the Ofori brothers. And as I met with them and went to the different regions where they were sourcing it and reviewed the facilities, they talked about how they were selecting the sort of the most richest and purest ginger roots. And it was very evident because in some of my early testing, I was using just ginger I had here in the US, right? And then when I started working with the Ghanaian ginger, it completely changed the flavor profile because it was so much more intense and rich and had a punch to it, and even a little spicy, I would say. And so I had to balance that out and decrease the intensity. But ultimately, I think for folks in the diaspora, uh, the sense of ginger really does evoke that healing and nourishing and cleansing spirit, which has been great.
That's really cool. Walk us briefly through the finished flavor profile then when you're bringing the ginger and this Riesling together. What should people expect if they taste your wine?
Yeah, so it's naturally like the Riesling has like the high acidity and these floral aromatics, and there's like a hint of residual sugar as well. And all of these attributes made it perfect for the ginger infusion because it's not like bone dry or overly oaky. It's got this like very crisp and aromatic profile. And the beautiful thing about the ginger is it lingers, right? And so you catch the hint of it first, like even approaching the glass, you can smell it right away. Um, but then you taste it and you feel the base Riesling is really great and incredible as well. But the ginger adds this new dimension that sort of lingers on the tongue after you finish. And I think for it's interesting because you see different drinking styles, and some people feel the ginger right away, some people feel it
Mm.
more after they finish. But I think what's really cool about that is it lends to some really interesting pairings depending on what cuisine you pair it with. And of course, we have some recommendations and dishes that I think it works really well with. But yeah, ultimately, it's one of those that it's best to try, and you'll get the sense of how much the ginger adds this really cool dimension.
Yeah. Well, wine certainly can be one of those drink cultures that leans heavily on tradition and can sometimes
Yes.
be resistant to
Yes.
new ideas. So, what kind of response have you had from maybe some of the more established, corners of the wine world to the fact that you're adding a spice to a wine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So very early on, when I was again doing the research and development for the brand, I met and spoke and consulted with some sommeliers and talked to them about the idea. And they were very clear with me that, in the sort of purest sense of the old world winemaking, like there's an extent to which this is a bastardization, right? This is not acceptable. But I think what's powerful about it is, and I spoke about this in my pitch as well, this brand is catering to sort of this new and emerging demographic that doesn't necessarily align themselves to some of these old standards, but still wants an excellent, indulgent experience in wine, but something that reflects their own flavor profiles and their own cultures that are represented there, right? And so, because I'm catering to this new market, there has been just overwhelming positivity in the response to it, right? But what's also been great to see is that even when I've exposed the wine to some folks who come from the old world who are very established in that world, um, they've been quite impressed as well with how the ginger hasn't overwhelmed or suppressed some of the important notes in the base Riesling. And I think that's just because we really nailed the perfect balance of the infusion. And so I would invite all folks, whether they're connoisseurs or newcomers, to try it and let me know their thoughts and their experience. And finally, I'll say that like I do absolutely respect, the tradition and the old world of winemaking. I think there's a reason why there's so much importance in the process and sort of the tradition and the history of how it's been done. So this is not an attempt to necessarily like dismiss it or to say that it's not important, but rather honoring it and exploring some innovative ways to uh, actually even expand or even popularize wine further to new audiences and try something new. So I hope it doesn't offend too much, but it's certainly been getting positive reception.
Very cool. Yeah, I feel like every branch of artisan beverages has that tension between celebrating and preserving tradition and also
Yes,
exploring new flavors and new ingredients. And I feel like you can do both. You can celebrate both of those.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Let's back up a little bit and talk about how you originally got into wine. What made you fall in love with this?
Yeah, so my original background is actually in the technology industry. I've been an entrepreneur in the past in tech, and I now work at a large tech company. But I think it happens to a lot of engineers where we're staring at screens so much, and you have this desire to get back into the tactile world, like engaging with smells and touch. And for me, with wine, my mother was really the main avenue that I got into it. Every time I would go visit her, I'd never show up empty-handed, always have a bottle of her favorite red for her. And I think because of the fact that she's also my avenue to the Ofori brothers, there was something very kind of poetic about her being my avenue to wine. And so I've always been an enthusiast and just a hobbyist as it pertains to wine. It didn't necessarily have a tremendous wine education to start, but because of my entrepreneurial background, having this idea for something I wanted to explore, I basically just set my mind to it and did the necessary research and learning, and was able to dive in pretty quickly. And thankfully, being able to connect with some great people in the industry who've coached me, and my producer has been extremely supportive as well in this ambitious project. What went from my idea was able to execute in about 11 months. And so it was pretty incredible to see that happen so quickly.
Oh, yeah, that is a quick turnaround. That's cool. Let's talk a little bit about storytelling with Ofori Brothers. With any artisan beverage, obviously the product has to be delicious, but almost equally important is how you tell people what it is and how you get it in front of them. What are you doing from a brand standpoint to position Ofori Brothers wine and explain what that is to your audience?
Yeah, so I think I'm really taking a hyper-local approach to start. And so in the New York City metropolitan area, there is kind of like this concentration of, I guess, young, upwardly mobile, uh, West African and diasporans who are working in some incredible industries. And like I said, enjoying these indulgent experiences in cuisine and restaurants and dining. And so for them, immediately, Ofori Brothers is positioned well, and they resonate with it strongly. And so taking this hyperlocal approach, I've partnered with some like-minded organizations and brands and some of their activations to have Ofori Brothers present, and that's really helped spread the messaging. So, for example, really just in the second month of the brand's inception, I had a really exciting partnership for New York Fashion Week with Nigerian American designer Tia Adiola for her 10th anniversary runway show, which got a lot of press and coverage. And Ofori Brothers was one of the sponsors, among others, other spirits for their official after party. And I think being like 2 months into the brand and getting exposure like that was really helpful. And so what I started to notice is organically people were discovering the brand. They were seeing people in their network engaging with it. And so there was that curiosity about, okay, what is this? And then once they get in front of it, and I have an opportunity to talk about the formulation, to talk about this infusion, it blows folks away. It resonates strongly with them. This is something I'm still learning. I think one of the challenges here is how much to lean into the storytelling about the Ofori brothers and their history, versus talking about the innovation of this, of, the Riesling infusion with ginger. And it's 7 months in, so I'm still figuring it out as I go. But thankfully, I had a lot of organic support from influencers and content creators who have been sort of championing and speaking positively about the brand and expanding it to new audiences. And so certainly seeing what's working and pushing that forward.
That is really cool. I saw on the label you've got a cacao pod on the tree. Thought that was a nice touch on there. That was fun.
Yeah.
Uh, Given the potential resistance we were talking about earlier from wine tradition to doing new things, have you run into any challenges with reaching your target audience who have maybe wine has not been marketed to them, or they have decided that the wine world is not their space? Have you run into any challenges like that, and how have you tried to get around that?
It's certainly a challenge I know I'm going to run into more so soon. As of right now, the brand is just entirely direct to consumer. So I use the platform Vino Shipper to handle fulfillment and delivery of the wine. Um, Direct to consumer has its challenges as well, however. And I think for me, it was a natural initial start to go from 0 to 1 and execute quickly and getting it to market. And also my background in tech, it played well with me understanding how to operate in the e-commerce space for direct to consumer. But one of the things that's affecting the entire industry is high shipping costs and rising shipping
Mhm.
costs. And so it's a natural deterrent when, the bottle is priced at sort of a mid-tier premium price of point of $30, but if you get slapped with a $22 shipping fee, you're not incentivized to spend $22 on shipping when you're purchasing a $30 bottle. And so that can be a barrier and a huge deterrent, which is why brick and mortar retail is the natural next step. And so I'm, again, early stages for the brand being month 7, but that's where we're headed right now, is getting into uh, targeted shops, wine stores, and restaurants within the New York City metro area. And to your point, to your question about the challenges of getting this kind of wine to the right audience, I think there are some really great hubs within the New York City area. For example, there's certain stores and brands that really love to highlight Black-owned spirit brands or Black-owned wine brands. And also, I think because of the sort of luxury and premium positioning of the brand as well, it does play with uh, other brands that, like for example, uh, the Chef Kwame has Tatiana restaurant that launched in New York. New York Times listed it as one of the top 10 restaurants in New York for this past calendar year. And I think that's a great example of uh, West African dishes that are now being like uplifted in this way that is seen as fine dining, right? And so there are more and more of these whether it's restaurants or members clubs or experiences that I think resonate strongly with the same kind of branding and positioning that Ofori Brothers is targeting. And so finding those hubs and finding those places is the easiest way for me to get in front of my customers. But naturally learning as I go and doing a lot of analysis and seeing what sticks.
Cool. Well, let's step away from the business side of it for just a moment. One of the things we like to talk about here on Bean to Barstool is the tasting process and experience, and how that can tie in with memory and emotion and
Mhm.
imagination, and really get to some personal areas of ourselves. Talk a little bit about the tasting process for you, whether that's with your wine or with anything else, and kind of what it means to you to be able to slow down and have that sensory experience.
We'll be right back.
Cocoa Supply offers premium cacao nibs, husks, and cacao fruit pulp straight from small farms in Ecuador, and they bring them directly to you. If you're a brewer looking to take your next small batch chocolate beer to the next level, you can do that with their bold flavors, exotic origins, and clean ingredients. Whether you're brewing a rich stout with roasted nibs, infusing a sour with cacao pulp, or adding a twist with freeze-dried passion fruit or blackberry, their ingredients bring layers of flavor, aroma, and, critically, story to your craft. These are ethically sourced, top-quality ingredients delivered with transparency and care. Trusted by brewers, roasters, and chocolate makers around the world, and now it's your turn to become part of that story. Visit cocosupply.com to start crafting with intention.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because for Ofori Brothers Wine in particular, it isn't just about taste. It's about memory. It's about cultural resonance. It's about aesthetic joy. Um, and so the ginger in particular, it evokes this like diasporic dish and herbal traditions, right? And so it's familiar, yet at the same time elevated. And I think the beautiful thing about it is that the tasting gives the wine gives people a way to connect with their ancestry, to connect with identity through sensory storytelling, right? So not only are they having an opportunity to think about the fact that they've never experienced the ginger and the Riesling, but they can also think about what are the other beverages that you might have grown up with, or you might have seen your aunties and uncles drinking that have had ginger in them from a cultural lens. And why is that something that we haven't seen as predominantly in a Western context? And I think that storytelling then gives you the opportunity to think through and have a sense of pride for where you come from and the different, really rich cultural history that we have, whether it's Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, or other parts of Africa, right? And so it really is a sort of cultural experience to taste it and experience it. But then I think also it's just really cool to see people's reaction to the ginger and and the surprise but delight on their face as
Yeah.
they it invites them for a second glass.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I imagine you've had some very satisfying moments of seeing somebody encounter this for the first time and have that moment.
One of the craziest experiences I have is even this past weekend I was in the Poconos Mountains celebrating one of my friend's birthdays, and I brought a bottle as a gift. He already had a few bottles that he brought there, which I was surprised to see. And usually when I'm around, I love to, do a little tasting with folks, give them explanation about the process. I stepped away for maybe 10, 20 minutes, came back, and both bottles were gone, right? So it's it's been great to see how much folks just love drinking it. And yeah, it's a wonderful thing to see.
Yeah, that's great. What's next, or what's down the road? Like what's kind of your like long-term dreams of where this could go for Afori Brothers?
Yeah, so being candid, right? When I launched this brand, um, I wasn't exactly sure how far I wanted to take it, right? Because it was very personal to me. It's something that has my family name on it. It's something that's like a heritage brand, and so I wanted to be very careful with and delicate with how I portray that to the world and make sure that I'm delivering in a way that is respectful and honoring their legacy. Um, I've been blown away by the support, and the fact that it's even sold out now, twice as fast as I anticipated, has been great to see. But this venture was fully self-funded, so I used some of my own savings to invest into it and really drove a lot of the operations behind the business on my own. And now I'm at a point where I think there is some degree of product market fit with the ginger infused Riesling, and I certainly am excited to scale that further, and I've already begun to take steps to do that. Things like winning the crafted fraction microgrant helps as well, and so I'm certainly pouring capital into scaling further. Naturally, there's a question of what SKUs are coming next on the product line, and I'm currently working on the early stages of R&D for a hibiscus infused rosé. So
Wow, nice.
more to come there. But there's a ton of work streams, as you can imagine, with any brand, consumer packaged good brands like this. And um, I'm always trying to focus on the highest priority item at a given point in time. There's some exciting activations that are coming up in the next few months, so more to come on that. But ultimately, really excited to scale, get into brick and mortar retail, and get more people the opportunity to try the ginger infused Riesling. So I'm still doing soul searching to determine the extent to which I'll explore outside capital. I love the Fawn Weaver's story with Uncle Nearest and how she was able to retain complete ownership of the brand and sort of scale it organically. So we'll see where things go from here. But if any of the listeners would love to support and help by connecting me with distributors or anyone who could support me, that would be great.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious, with your family background, going back to the Ofori brothers with cacao, I mean, have you had any thoughts or ideas around possibly working with that as a current Ghana crop?
Absolutely. It's something that I've thought about, and even there's cacao wine within Ghana that is produced at certain regions, but it's a complex and difficult challenge, both operationally, logistically, in terms of the flavor profile, even quality assurance. There was a lot of challenges, and that's why I opted to work with local U.S. Vineyards and then tie in the ginger post fermentation from Ghana. It operationally made things a lot easier. But with cocoa specifically, in terms of the flavor profile, there's definitely something that in the future I'd love to explore that infusion. Um, I personally am not a huge fan of dessert wines or even like chocolate wines. So that's the thing that's been like I've been very cautious about, not wanting to rush it. I think it'll be one of the SKUs and products that when it does get released, just know that there'll be a lot of thought and process that went into making sure it was the perfect blend and infusion.
Very cool. How can people get your wine? You've talked about direct to consumer component. If people are curious after this episode, how can they seek that out?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to oforibrothers.com and order ships directly to 42 states in the US. And so if you're in one of those states, you can order directly and it'll ship to your home. As of right now, when we're recording on July 21st, we're currently sold out, but we're restocking next month in August. And so folks will be able to access that. And you can follow us on Instagram at Ofori Brothers Wine and on TikTok at Ofori Brothers. That's Ofori Brothers, and lots more to come in the future.
Awesome. Well, I know we've touched on this throughout the conversation, but the last question that I always ask people is about the story that their company is telling. What story is Ofori Brothers Wine telling?
Yeah, we're telling a story about reclaiming space for African influence in global luxury, right? And also doing it in a way that feels personal, joyful, grounded in excellence, but grounded in this really, really beautiful idea of tradition and connection back to the homeland. And I'm really excited for everybody to get an opportunity to expand their palate and try something new and something that gives them a sense of pride, a sense of joy, a sense of connection, and inspiration.
Beautiful. Kumi, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
David, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
We've talked often on Bean to Barstool about cultural flavor vocabularies and the importance of personal backgrounds in how we recognize, describe, and appreciate flavors in artisan foods and drinks. In fact, our very first episode years ago was on this idea, and I continue to believe that looking at the tasting experience through this lens is critical to not only dismantling the Eurocentric hegemony of the modern tasting lexicon for wine, beer, chocolate, and other indulgences, but just for enjoying those things more. There's an entire world of flavors and stories behind those flavors out there, and people who can share those flavors and stories with us. Why not all sit down at the table together and share those? We can learn more about our favorite foods and drinks, and also about ourselves and about each other. I'll drop the link to Ofori Brothers Wine in the show notes so you can order some bottles for yourself. Let me know what you think, and if you decide to pair it with craft chocolate, share what you come up with there. On the subject of wine, Melinda and I have been spending our Thursday evenings at my friend Lauren's wine bar, Jouy Wine, in Dayton, for their weekly blind tasting called Taste Buds. You get a flight of 3 wines with no information, and you have to guess what type of grape each is, and the year, and the origin. It's a ton of fun, and also a reminder of just how little I know about wine. Hopefully it will help me improve. Last fall, Lauren and I led a tasting event together at her bar called Funk Buddies, which was a tasting of mixed fermentation beer and wine, kind of comparing and contrasting the two. And we're going to be doing that again this fall. The dates are October 15th and November 19th, and we'll have information and ticket details out on those soon, so keep an eye out on that. In the next episode, we're going to be talking with Angie from Chocolate Spiel. We'll discuss pairing chocolate with a variety of drink types and also talk about the visual component of sensory appreciation and how she creates her eye-catching, colorful chocolate bars. On August 22nd, Angie will be leading a cider and chocolate pairing at Yonder Cider Tap House in Ballard, Washington. So if you're out in that area, definitely check that out. Finally, the winners of the U.S. Open Beer Championship were recently announced in over 100 categories, but of particular interest to us here at Bean to Barstool are the beers made with cacao or chocolate. So I want to share the winners there. In the chocolate or cocoa beer category, gold went to Double Astral by Third Eye Brewing from Hamilton, Ohio. That name may be familiar to listeners of Bean to Barstool. We interviewed Kelly Montgomery, the brewmaster at Third Eye, about Double Astral and his other chocolate beers just a couple months back. I led a pairing and tasting event with them back in the spring, and then we had them on in June. So you can go back and listen to that interview to hear all about how he and his team create Double Astral. They also won gold in the peanut butter beer category with Dark Aura, which is also made with cacao as well. Silver went to Viator Obscura Triple Chocolate from Wandering Monsters Brewing in Cincinnati. Actually, both of those breweries, Third Eye and Wandering Monsters, are in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was just down at Wandering Monsters this past weekend and had several excellent beers made with cacao. From them, they are working with Ethereal Confections for their cacao nibs, and I might just get Jason Brewer, their brewmaster, on the show here soon because they're making some fantastic beers. And then finally, bronze went to Oroasis from Omnium Brewing Company in New Hampshire. Thanks to Kumi for coming on the show today. Thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.